No, I'm not going to gobble like a turkey. Welcome. Hello, welcome to the 2 Month Review, a weekly book podcast in which we take a book, read it slowly, talk about it, make jokes. I was going to try something different, but that didn't work out. Anyways, this season we are doing 2666 by Roberto Bolaño, and I'm Chad Post from Up on Other Books, joined as always by Katie Whittemore, translator.
Hello.
How are you doing, Katie?
I'm good. How are you? Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving to you as well.
Thank you.
So you are going to be celebrating Thanksgiving in Spain.
Yes, but not today, on Sunday. And I'm celebrating a little bit by myself right now in the afternoon.
I'm celebrating with you a little bit as well.
Cheers.
Breakfast out for the morning is it's totally acceptable on Thanksgiving.
Sure is.
Yeah.
Sure
is.
is.
Have one day off a week. Or one day off a week. One day off every so often. I don't even know, man.
One day off a week. Is Brian not joining us today?
Brian is not. Brian has both his wife and kid are home, and he is cooking for people, and I don't know what else is going on, but he said it would be a little tough for him to jump on. So he said we can handle it ourselves, so we can handle it ourselves. So we're in the part about the crimes. It's going to take us like 4 episodes to go through this part in particular. So this goes up to page 515 today, which there are a couple lines or a couple like through lines in this section, and we could take them one by one if you want, rather than just like counting everything. But generally speaking, how did you find this section this time?
Well, I'm starting to feel the effects of the repetition of the descriptions of the murders and the corpses, and yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the first time that I read this book, I had a similar, I think, experience where I start to like want to skip.
I know
the paragraphs, and then I'm like, no, you mustn't. Like, you have to like witness this person, because usually, it'll describe, well, and not always, but in a lot of the cases, like when something is known about her, the victim, the narrator will describe a little bit about her life, or like where she came from or what she did, but not for all the victims, but for some of them. And it's like, once I read those first lines of like, long dark hair, she, whatever the hyoid bone, whatever, either was strangled, raped, vaginally, anally, all the ways. I'm just sort of like, okay, I want to like skip it. I don't want to read that anymore. And I think that is part of Bolaño's intention and project here, is to probably, I mean, I would say, like, make us feel those effects of these things becoming banal, and of like, this pervasiveness where you're just sort of like tired of it almost.
Yeah.
Like, but you can't escape it because it's in the next paragraph too.
I know.
So anyway, that's the experience I'm having. I'm also having this experience, like, and I don't know if you feel this way, but there's like just like this, I have this sense of like momentum. Like, I feel like we are starting to like if you imagine like the little old-fashioned trains.
That's what I was thinking. And it's like, you that hand motion in particular.
There's like chugging along, slowly picking up steam, right? And I feel like that was the experience I had reading this section too, is that, we're not getting to any conclusions, but I feel like it's like the connections are firing more and more quickly. And I feel like we're being dragged towards something. I don't know what it is.
The abyss or the giant.
The giant is coming.
The giant is coming.
Can you hear his steps? You stupid motherfuckers.
That is creepy.
It's so creepy.
It's very creepy. There are a few lines that I marked that were just like creeping me out last night as I was reading this. I had a similar experience with the actual crimes, and reading them that you did, of wanting to like sort of skim, not really read them that closely, like, and also because some of the details let me go back to the details in a second, but just on the general visceral impression, it is unnerving, it is disturbing, and there are so many different names and references that never come up again. So it'd be like, talk about like which maquiladora they worked at, who the like boyfriend was, who this person was, and you get that little story, and then those names go away. And so sometimes for me, it's like, I don't even know if I'm supposed to know who these people are at this point, but they don't just focus on the crime part, and that bringing attention to the crime part is super unnerving. And then start noticing those details, like we talked about last week: the long black hair, strangled, anally and vaginally raped. And this one we get the three-way rape, which is a fucked up, misogynistic, dark section.
We also get the nipple being bitten off and the breast severed.
That's what I was going to say. So the nipple and the breast, and then there's one other thing that I thought kept coming up. I forget, the hyoid bone. I was like, what is that exactly? And then I looked it up. I was like, I should not know any.
Is it from being strangled?
It's like, yeah, if you punch someone like right here and broke this, like.
Well, we also start to see the repetition of the Santa Teresa Cananea highway. So now we're getting like, so there does seem to be like a shift in territory as well, but or at least there's like an addition of like almost like new territories, new signatures, new patterns that are being added. And I think that, you know, that's maybe part of the feeling of acceleration as well, of accumulation and acceleration. And that obviously, you know, they've got someone in custody.
Yeah.
And the things keep and the murders keep happening. But I think like I think that we've got, I see in this section, like we're being introduced more to like the narco culture. Like we have, you know, La Locura finds out, like Epifanio tells them, you know, well, didn't you know, like, you know, your old boss is like, yeah, he's like a narco. And he's like, oh, I thought he was just rich. It's like, no, he's not. You know, so we're seeing like, and then we have like the Cananea highway. So, and I think that is going to have something to do with, and the crimes themselves, look different than the first bodies, I think, that were appearing.
In what way do you mean?
Well, in that I think some of these signatures.
Okay.
Like, I think, so there's some sense that some of the women that are being killed, you know, most of them have had, you know, have been subjected to sexual violence. And some of them, you know, it's like they you know, they were stabbed or they were strangled. That's, I think, the majority. But then you have this line of like they don't all have the long dark hair. So there's the ones that it's the young girls. The young girls have the long hair, and they're usually like short, like 5'2", 5'3", slate frame. So that seems to be like one kind of thing going on. Then you have, you know, the new signature of the with the breasts, and then there are just, you know, the other killings, which sometimes we know that it's from, you know, partner violence, domestic violence.
This is really unnerving too.
I know. So anyway, my point is that it's becoming clear that like the clues that you were looking for are not going to point to a single solution.
Yes.
So there are clues, but the clues don't lead back to one criminal. And I think that's, you know, another way that Bolaño sort of elides the detective novel.
Agree. There are two things in in the part of Chris Andrews' book that I read this past week that sort of relate to this. I can try and find the exact thing, and I'm going to summarize them, and they're not super. Not that they're not intelligent, but they're kind of things that we've sort of hinted at or talked about. But I think are
very intelligent.
Very intelligent, very the smartest take on 2666 possible, and Bolaño's fiction. But they relate to both the aimlessness of characters and the detective nature of the characters. And with the detective one starting first, like there are several we don't get so much about our Jesus de Martinez this week.
Juan de Dios.
Or Juan, yeah. He was more prevalent last week, and now he's like shows up a few times this week, but not so much. And there's a different one, Epifanio, and then there's a few other detectives that show up. But when they solve things, we'll talk about Harry Morgana because he actually fits this exactly. But when they solve things, it's generally by accident. They usually do not find in Bolaño's writings that Chris Andrews goes through, not just this book, but other ones. Particularly when people are trying to find things, detect things, understand things, even when they go to like the critics go to look for Arcamboldi, they generally don't succeed. And if they do, it's generally by chance, or it's just not. It doesn't even get really referenced. So, like one of the examples was from Distant Star, in which they find Carlos Wieder in Lorette de Mar, but like it's just referenced. He's like, oh, I saw him there, and you don't know what happened. Like this, the detective nature of figuring out that thing doesn't go anywhere. And then the aimlessness part was that a lot of there's this. He goes in this book goes into a deep theory of like I forget what it's called, but it's like moral narrative theory, in which the statement of the theory is that if you can't tell a story of the only way to live a full and rich life is to be able to tell the story of your life, to be able to put your life into a long story. It makes it more fulfilling and rewarding rather than being episodic, in which things don't necessarily connect. And then there's like a counter argument that was written by some theorists that's bullshit, and that's sort of like favors one thing over another, and that you can have a full life like through episodic living and whatnot. You don't, and like the idea of having to create a self through this narrative idea is a little bit more problematic than one would initially think. But this comes up in the book where he's talking about the characters in 2666, like Liz Norton and other people who are aimless. Like they just kind of do things, and like they drift. They just drift from one thing to another, sort of doing stuff. But and then there are ones that do try and create a narrative out of their life. But a lot of them are just like drifting. So Harry Magana, for instance, he's trying to solve this murder. It was Lucienne, right? And he's trying to solve it, but like how he's trying to solve it is also sort of haphazard. Like he just goes to like the person, finds a name, goes to them, says, "Do you know these people?" They're like, "Yeah, they used to work at this whorehouse." Goes to the whorehouse, tries to find that person. Like, "Do you know where Miguel is?" Like, "No." And then he ends up at the house with the dead body under the bed and gets essentially, I assume, murdered by the two people that had been following him. Like, but he's also like when he calls the police officer in L.A., he's basically the guy's like, "Oh yeah, I kind of remember you." He's like, "Weren't you married?" He's like, "Oh yeah, my wife died 5 years ago, like right after that thing, and I'm just here doing this." Like he also has this sort of aimlessness to him. Those two things seem to collide in this chapter, where the detective work isn't like we're seeing these signatures, we're reading into them as being a serial killer, but the detectives and the police force aren't really doing a lot. Like they seem to focus when they do anything, they focus on one particular murder, not like the systematic nature of it, and go with the most like thing that just kind of is handed to them. Like even with the arrest of Klaus Haas, it's like talking to the friend, and the friend's like, "Yeah, she wants to be in computers." It's like, oh shit, nobody wants to be in computers. And they're like, "No, we went to the store. There's a tall guy that she used to talk to, tall blonde gringo guy." And so they're like, "Oh, well, that's it. There we go."
You got him.
You got him.
Got him.
He's closed.
Yeah, it's like the characters. There are so many characters, and this is, I think, obviously the victims are one set of characters, one set of names. They're almost all named, and it's like this mountain of proper nouns, right, and of names. And then we have all of these different detectives, which I don't. Some of them I remember. I know. I'm like, I heard about him before. It's like what's like Roballedo or. But I'm not like following because the characters are not very important. Like the characters are they're not even really like, I think this relates to the aimlessness. It's like they don't even really have like a subjectivity or a will. It's like they're just being sort of like borne along by these forces that are bigger than them. And I think that's really interesting because there are so many individual characters, but the individual doesn't matter like at all in this. And I think that that's very interesting too, and could be tied to I don't know, like a critique or a comment on the forces that are behind the globalization and Santa Teresa and things we've talked about before with neoliberalism and that sort of thing, like that the the totality is crushing the individual here,
Yeah.
and that the individual can act, but the individual actions like really aren't that important
Yeah.
in the face of these other bigger forces. So
Exactly.
like you can put someone in prison, or you can catch like the boyfriend that stabbed the girlfriend, but you're not going to stop what's happening. It doesn't matter how many people you put in jail. It's bigger than that. And I think that's really interesting. The other thing that I would love to talk about at some point is, and I brought this up before, and I want to like I want to do some more reading around it because I'm sure somebody has theorized about this. But so like detective fiction, what is the point of it? It's to it's like you're looking in the past, right? Because you're reconstructing past events in order to arrive at a solution and what? Change the world?
Solve the crime. There's all right, the good thing about I'll read this comment. So there's a comment that says aimlessness could be a literary stand-in for stream of consciousness writing by the author of a text, which is interesting too. As like a meta level as to the aimlessness rather than within the character's framework. Detective novels too, like, so there's the ways in which a detective novel sets forth a problem or a situation, and then there's different types, but the type that most common is that you are given enough sort of clues that you are the reader and the detective are allied in solving that mystery and having that conclusion. Like you have to, it's not, I know that I don't understand musical terms, right, but it reminds me of like a fugue where you have the starting key, you have the thing, and then it has to get resolved. And so everything else that goes along the way can be as interesting as gritty, can be like different things, but you have to get that.
But it has to be integrated.
It has to be integrated. It has to end. It has to go back to the norm, back to the key. There's an amazing book that I wonder if we could publish now through Delphi by Michel Butor called, is it Passing Time? Is that right? I think it is. We did a bunch of his books back in the day when I worked there, but there's one that's about writing a mystery novel, and it's like a detective novel within a detective novel setup, and really questions and looks at like what detective novels function serves and how they work, and it's fascinating. I love that book, but I don't remember why we could never get the rights to it, but or what happened with it. But I think you're right. Like there's the detective nature of it doesn't really add up. Like there's there isn't one killer. If there was like a serial killer, it would be a detective novel.
Right. And if there could be like when the crime is solved, then order is restored.
Right?
Yeah. And like the status quo can continue. And the sense in this book is that there is no status quo. It's like quicksand. Or like that the world is in quicksand.
Status quo. Or this is the status quo.
Or this is the status quo. Or this is the status quo. But I feel like there's like a future orientation to this book. And I think, it's the title and it's those clues, like that there is a sense that that potentially there is a conclusion, a resolution, or a truth, but it is so far in the future that it's like the apocalypse, or it's like it's not possible. There's no possibility or plausibility now for any sort of resolution.
Yeah.
But there's a hint but it's also not like nihilistic, I don't think.
Right.
Like there is this sort of, for me anyway, my sense is that there is this orientation toward like a future understanding or knowledge or grasping or resolution but it's displaced and displaced and displaced, hundreds and hundreds of years potentially into the future or whatever. Exactly. So I think that's really, I'm finding that really interesting.
Me too.
to think a bit about, the form that this is taking and but most of all, I'm interested in how it's like making me feel, what is the experience of reading it? And all I can say is like, it's, it's a sense of like the ratcheting up and that we're moving. And I think the introduction of this, like that the giant is coming, the giant in the footsteps, and you're like, oh, so it's like, again, like weaving in. I mean, I read that and I think, what is that? Who is that? Who could it be? Who else has been described in that way?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the idea of the coming, whenever you say of the coming, it's like the Messiah. Like it's hard to not think
Yes.
in that messianic way.
There are like three things that one that like three reactions that right away. One is that when Germans start talking about giants and like the sounds of steps coming, I don't feel good. Like
Yeah.
immediately, that's not a good feeling. But two, the messianic aspect of it was what I was thinking of too, and
Yeah.
especially in relation to the book by Laszlo Krasha-Horkai, Satan Tango, in which they're waiting for this guy to return. Once he returns, things will be okay in this town. Everything will go. He will fix everything, and that sort of idea of that figure that can arrive. I mean, it's kind of like the basis of westerns too, or like any book, like either someone comes to town or somebody leaves town. But it does have that sense of foreboding, and it
Yeah.
could be really good or really terrible. Kind of goes back to what
Right.
we talked about in relation to the painting on the first volume of the 3 volume set. And that idea of like revelation, of being able to see the truth, and it can be
Right.
both damaging or powerful
Right.
or good.
Yeah.
There was one thing I really wanted to ask or talk to you about. I'm gonna find it here. It's gonna take a second, but we get Sergio, is it Gonzalez? Yeah,
hmm
back in this section a little bit
hmm
more. When there's the reporter that had gone to work on writing about the penitent, got interested in all the murders, wasn't able to write that story, but now he's moved up at the paper. He's sort of getting involved in the crime writing side of things. He does go to see Klaus Haas, as they refer to him, as press conferences,
Right.
which is a whole thing we can talk about in a second too. But there's one part where he's talking to this whore. One night after making love to a whore, as they lay smoking in bed, he asked her what she thought about all the kidnappings and all the bodies of the women found in the desert, and she said she had only a vague idea of what he was talking about. So this
Where
is
are you? Where are you, Chad?
sorry, that is page 465.
Okay. I underlined this section too.
Yeah, so that goes, and then he tells her a little bit about it, and it's interesting, like who knows, like the fact that like the women who are at risk might not be even aware of that this is going on, whereas the quote unquote detectives and police sort of do, but like also don't highlight that. There's something weird to me about like that information, or like the way that is being represented, of who knows what about this situation. Even we know so much more because we see all the murders. But one of the things with you're talking about with all the crimes and the repetition of them and the names is that frequently they'll say like this detective or this inspector was assigned to the case. The case was never
Right.
solved. The case was closed.
Yeah. The
But
case
like
was closed. Yeah.
it's never the same. It's not always the same person. There's like 4 or 5 or 6 different people that get assigned these cases. They're not being put together as one large thing.
Well, there's a hint of that happening at some point, which is something that I want to talk about after. But
Okay.
but I want to continue with the section that
This
you
is
were
the
just
next
looking
part is
at.
the part I wanted to ask you about.
Which part?
Is okay, so is then they go on, tells her about the women's protests about it, and then as he was talking, she yawned, not because she wasn't interested in what he was saying, but because she was tired, which irritated Sergio and made him say in exasperation that in Santa Teresa they were killing whores, so why not show a little professional solidarity? To which the whore replied that he was wrong. In the story as he had told it, the women dying were factory workers, not whores. Workers, she said. And then Sergio apologized. And as if a light bulb had gone on over his head, he glimpsed an aspect of the situation that until now he'd overlooked. And that's the part that I kind of remember you talking to me about either on this podcast or separately, of the fact that it's emphasized that they are workers.
They are workers. Yeah, I mean, I have this like so many asterisks on this point because I feel like this is so critical to understanding potentially part of Bolaño's thesis or project in this and what he's doing. And and I think, I mean, it's clearly like I mean, we keep coming back to it, and I don't want to be super repetitive, but I think we can introduce some new ideas again to like this idea of the neoliberal critique. But so I think what's really interesting with this particular section is that Sergio Gonzalez is like making this equivalence between women that are working in a waged job, clocking in and clocking out for a big company. He's making like an equivalence, or he's just conflating them completely with prostitutes.
Yeah.
And the prostitute's like, hold on, like, wait a minute, like we need to separate these things out, right? But we're talking about two excluded groups in any case, right? But the fact that it's what this highlights is that like the factory workers are even more socially excluded and at risk than prostitutes. And what is that pointing to? And I think that what that's pointing to is a much like not an individually based concept of these crimes where we're sort of imagining like, well, there's a serial killer and he only kills prostitutes. He picks up a whore and he murders her. Here it's like this proliferation of bodies from all these different, and most of them are factory workers.
Yeah.
So we can start to kind of conceive of like a more like systematic killing. And this to me, I think what's so critical, and I have some notes here actually. I'm glad you highlighted this because I was thinking a lot about this today. I think this goes back to two different parts that we've read in previous sections that are really critical. And one is Fate, when he's in the when he overhears Kessler, who I believe we see more of in the future in this section, the U.S. Like FBI agent specialist. And so when Kessler is talking about the people who form a society outside of society and people who are outside of that system, and also how those people's experiences are not legible. They're not you cannot read or write them. They are like outside of language. So that's very interesting. And then the other part that I think is critical is thinking about when the first description of El Chile, the big like clandestine dump.
Yeah.
When he talks about how like the inhabitants of El Chile were like their basic needs, like no one even knew what their basic needs were. Like no one could understand them. They were like aliens. And so there's this complete dehumanization of a particular sector of the polis, right? And that those people's experiences cannot even be, we can't even comprehend them as humans, and that their experience is illegible, and it can't, we try to use language, right, to like describe the experience, and that fails, right? What does that mean? It means that these people are people so far outside of society that not only are they exploited, but these women are completely irrelevant. They are just super like superfluous flesh. And that I think is what Bolaño is sort of like sending up as the consequences of this moment in history.
Can I try to tie this into that idea of the narrative self for 1 second? So like they are people that are unwritable. They cannot be created into a narrative self. And at the same time, when you talked about the crimes and like the individuals and how individuals don't really matter, is sort of saying again, like you wouldn't have like in a different sort of book, you would have the savior, the messiah, the detective whose narrative self becomes the one that solves this problem and impacts history, like what you said, returns things to the status quo or solves them. And both of those are thwarted throughout. And in this case, they're not even written. They're not even given that part, but they're not even capable of. So yeah, I think that's really interesting. I think that those two things do tie together really well.
I mean, I think that like the bodies, it's like the bodies are, and there's a bunch of writing on this. Like there's people, I can just name a few theorists that like I have in mind from like lit crit days that I think relate to this. But like I think about Zizek and I think about Lacan. I mean, obviously I feel like there's a lot about here. There's Jameson in this part, anything to do with sort of like, globalization and history and a Marxist perspective. But the psychoanalytic aspect of it, which used to, in the past really, really interested me, and especially when I was writing on this for my thesis, was the idea of the unmediated real, right? Like Lacan's real, that which is outside of the symbolic order, which is outside of language and outside of like what we can grasp as reality. Mm-hmm. And Jameson kind of uses that, right? That theory to develop his concept of history, and of history being an unbroken totality, right? That exists below the surface of events. Mm-hmm. So that there's something subterranean that rules and that remains unbroken.
The Illuminati. The Illuminati.
The lizard people.
The lizard people.
No, but in this sense, it's like that. I feel this in this book, that there is this sense of something underlying what we can perceive around us, right? And what we use to describe that in language, and that there are things that remain outside and are where that's a foreclosed possibility for certain things. There are certain things which we cannot describe, which we cannot comprehend, grasp, or make legible, right? Mm-hmm. And so the real, right? And then if we think about like Zizek and Etienne Balibar also wrote about this with the idea of cruelty and like an extreme violence and the barbarous, is that there are these moments of like rupture where the real, right, mm-hmm. interrupts reality. And for a moment, what we perceive something beyond what we can normally perceive. Right. And that can create, that's the uncanny, or it's this sense of like, of like abject fear, like Guadalupe Roncal feels when she's sitting, and waiting for Haas to come sit down, or when she drives by the prison and sees and senses like the torn apart body of a woman. So it's these moments where you're like, or when someone's looking at a house and then all they can think of, that there's no lights on in the house, and the immediate connection is that everyone's been like murdered in there or fled. Right. So right. it's these. So what Bolaño I think does is show like these moments of this eruption of mm-hmm. that underlying sense that we're not really able to grasp, and often, some theorists would talk about this and say that, the violence is that unmediated expression of the real, which is really interesting because it's a different type of violence. This is like an unmotivated violence. And I feel like the sense I have, I've never put this into words. But could be, so excuse this, maybe the really strange metaphor, but it's coming to me now that it's like, what this is, it's like I picture like the desert and Santa Teresa, and it's like these like little mushrooms, like little fungi, like popping up. It's just like, it rains, and overnight there's just like, these, and it's this, again, this punctuating sort of sense of things erupting, violence that erupts and that escapes being symbolized.
Yeah. I think I like your metaphor. I think that is very interesting. And it is, I agree with you too, that there is that sense of the real that keeps breaking through. This is, and at times, like, there's that belief in other narratives, like in the Pynchon narratives, where getting to the real is where revolution can happen. Mm. And in here, that because it goes beyond the symbolic order, it goes beyond everything, and is like the time where the world can change. Everything could change, so it doesn't have to be necessarily evil. But in this, it feels like it's necessarily evil, in part because every time that we go back in history is to a point in which there is the notion of like, this is where the slave trade started, this is where this happened, this is where we're in Detroit where people got abandoned. It's like a whole thing.
I'm just reading Andre's comment.
We have two comments from Andre about the greatest challenge of the section has been how to read it, since the characters are not part of any narrative. The challenge is the reader's discerning powers of reading into literary text. Borges would be proud of us for just getting through the section. It's fun. Speaking of someone who wrote detective books, detective stories, and is obsessed with detective stuff. There's Borges. There's really interesting. I think I mentioned this on here, but there's an interesting bit about his sort of way of writing detective stories where the characters within them solve it, but it's not the right solution. And that only the reader could figure out what the solution was. And that he had kind of theorized about this a few times of like, you're given a mystery, there's an answer to it, Klaus Haas, that the characters are like, well, this explains a certain amount of it, but the reader is aware that that is false. That narrative isn't right. Because there's no. Do you even think that Klaus Haas murdered? I forget. This feels awful, but like the name of the woman.
There's so many names. Don't feel awful.
So many names. So whichever one it is.
No, Estrella, I think.
Estrella.
Was that Estrella?
Maybe. Sure. We'll go with it. Do you think he even killed her?
I don't know. I think he is such a fascinating character, and that like he's clearly not like a good dude. He
was charged with rape and public,
right, like he has a history. Yeah, maybe he did kill her, or maybe he didn't, but he's necessary for whatever's coming next. Like, I think it's interesting in this part where they say, well, maybe he's just a scapegoat. And what does one need a scapegoat? Like, what is the theory of the scapegoat, for a society? It's that all of those ills and all of those crimes have to be put in one place.
Mm-hmm.
And that person sort of like sacrificed to purge, right? Whatever the community has to get, be exculpated for. Exculpated. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, close enough. I can see it written.
I know I see the word, but I don't know if that's.
Yeah, me too. That's how I felt. So, it's like I'm dying to see where Klaus like leads us. Like the German connection, the tall connection, and then the giant is coming, and then it's like I'm just Archimboldy bells are going off in my brain, and it's another place where we're going to see these possible sites of connection.
Exactly. I had one question about that. Isn't it Rosa Mendez gets mentioned in the end here? Is that our Rosa Mendez from the Fate section?
It could be.
Okay.
She's one of the Rosas, right?
And I didn't have the other volume near me when I found this, because I was like, her name was Rosa Mendez.
I thought so too. So this is something interesting. One of our listeners and watchers, Andre, brought up an interesting point about how to read this, and the idea of like the resistance toward narrativizing everything that's going on. And there's a really interesting part that I want to look at on page 470 in my edition.
Mm-hmm.
And it opens with, "Life is hard," said the mayor of Santa Teresa. "We have 3 clear-cut cases," said Inspector Angel Fernandez. "Everything has to be examined with a magnifying glass," said the man from the Chamber of Commerce. "I do examine everything with a magnifying glass over and over until I can't see straight," said Pedro Negrete. "The most important thing is not to stir up any shit," said the mayor. And so this whole section is like this theater set piece.
Yeah.
It's written in such a different way than anything else is written in the book. Mm-hmm. I was like laughing almost when I was reading it, because I wrote, it says "Life is hard," and I circled it and wrote, okay. So, like, but I picture like, if this were like, if they were putting on like a little like play, like in a moment, it would be like the guys sitting around a table with like lights coming down from above on them, and like the dark room around them, and they'd each be like delivering their line, and they're delivering, one perspective on what's happening. And I just think this is really, really interesting. But the Chamber of Commerce guy is obviously the worst.
Yeah, very much.
The Chamber of Commerce guy is terrible. But this is really interesting, and it's like the idea of like the motives. and if there are motives, and what they're beginning to see is sort of like the patterns, you know, and the personal signatures.
And I just lost this section, but there is one that related to the signatures, and that part was here it is on 495. Her hands were tied behind her back, and a little later, someone noticed that the rope was knotted the same way as the rope that had bound Estrella Ruiz Sandoval, which made some policemen smile.
Oh.
Which, yeah, and then like as a signature, there's also, this is the part that you mentioned is one of the first ones that has so after the magnifying glass thing, they're like, we have to do what it takes. We have a serial killer like in the Gringo movies, said Inspector Ernesto Ortiz Dio. I can't read. I wrote my line right through the middle of his name. And then later on 505, is it Reinaldo is talking. And the Chicano he was talking to told him the story of an LA serial killer, a man who killed only homosexuals. My God, said Reinaldo, we've got someone here who only kills women. And then they go on to talk about it, and he's like, well, they made a movie of it because they caught him. And they're like, who's in the movie? And like, Keanu Reeves. Like,
I know, it's
weird, like this shit of like it
this
is
the absurd.
The serial killer thing is like made into this narrative of a movie. Of like they reference it both times that this comes up, or those two times that it comes up, they reference it as a American movie idea.
Well, and that's again like the idea of spectacle, right? And of the fact that like if the violence or the cruelty or the barbarism, right, that we're experiencing and that we're seeing or witnessing here, like if it really can't be apprehended in its true nature, if we can't really grasp what that violence is, and if we can't put words to if words can't do justice to what this violence is, then what does it become? Well, any representation of it becomes spectacle. And so it's like, if we are same way that we're reading this and these violent accounts, we know that these are based on real murders.
Yeah.
And then, but the linkage, the only way that we can sort of like describe them or link to anything is by thinking about like the Gringo movies, right? And other serial killers, which again, like that is a false equivalence.
Yeah.
There might be a serial killer at work here, but it's something far greater. Like the femicides cannot be explained by a serial killer.
There might be 5 serial killers.
There might be 5, but it's the system. And I think that's what's, I think that's like, kind of what the point is, and what is the system that creates the conditions for that to be happening.
Yeah, this doesn't necessarily add anything to our conversation, but I think about it every time you talk about the Kessler section and the writing and the description, because what he says in there too is like in that section, if I remember right, is that the newspaper accounts would write about certain things but not others. There's something about like what was being written and what was covered up. And there's this book by Bill James and his daughter, I think her name is Rachel. Is it Rachel? Where is it? Yeah, Rachel McCarthy James, called The Man from the Train. And this book is it's fascinating because it's about some of these big murders that were written about in these papers back in what years was this? It's like the late 1800s and early 1900s, about these crimes were like these horrific crimes where like all of a sudden this family of 4 would be chopped up with an axe and they'd all be murdered at their house. And they're all in these small little towns throughout the Midwest and the Southwest, and they would never be solved because there's nothing. And so in 2017, Bill James and his daughter wrote this book where they put together the fact that by using these different accounts, that all these papers had all these crimes, but they never communicated with each other. They're all in like just far enough apart that like that paper doesn't go. It's at the point in time where we don't have information traveling faster than the way that we do now. It traveled as fast as like a train traveled. And what they figured out is they found the murderer. It was one guy, and he would go on these trains and he'd ride a train, get off, murder a family, and like leave. And there's points they figured out exactly who he was, where he came from, where he worked, in the whole system of it. But it was based on using this knowledge of like these disparate pieces of information that had barely been legible, and they were legible because they were like horrifically large crimes, right. But they were like also not. It's like kind of, there's something about it that's sort of similar. It always reminds me, whenever you mention that section, I think of this book because it was such an interesting book about like knowledge, information, and and how we can't see the big picture sometimes.
Yeah, right. So wait, when were those murders taking place?
Late 1800s, beginning of the 1900s.
So, and that's really interesting too, if you think about the railroad system, which changed the United States and changed particularly, you know, west of the Mississippi,
Mm-hmm.
and was bringing, you know, people and progress west. Like at that particular time, it's like now you have a killer who's using a new system
Yeah.
that obfuscates the crime.
Exactly.
By being able to take the train and get off in different places and be moving in this way. And so that's really interesting. I think there's connections there too with the idea of like the conditions of progress, like the same technology or the same possibilities for advancement and progress are the very things that lead to disaster, or for at least some people, and that's only for the excluded. So it's like progress is happening, but it has its remainders.
Yeah, not equal. It's not. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, and that the very it's not just that it's not just that what happens, like it's not just like these people are becoming irrelevant through a particular process or like because of an event, let's say. It's because of the very nature of the technologies or the systems are producing them.
Yeah.
They're not like it's almost like, I mean, especially with the maquiladoras, like think about this. This is really interesting. Let's see if I can pull the thoughts together. It's like if we think about exploitation and worker exploitation, they are being exploited, but it's not even like there was like a sort of, I say native in the sense that like a population of people just like waiting there for the maquiladoras to exploit. No, these are people, the maquiladoras produced the possibility of these women being in. So the maquiladoras are producing its own victims, basically. It's like that the globalization in this neoliberal system is doesn't just allow for the exploitation and the deaths, but it's what makes it possible.
Sorry, so someone's vacuuming right outside my door.
Why are you on mute?
Mute myself so you guys
anyway.
Yeah, I get exactly what you said. Another connection, weirdly, is that the man from the train was German. He's a German immigrant, so
we could read into that.
We got to make that connection.
So what else? What else do you have underlined that you want to talk about?
I'm looking for one of the things as you were saying that and you were talking about the progress when I had myself muted is it also seems to relate in my mind to the cars. All the cars that get mentioned over and over again. Like they're just generic, the black Peregrino, the black this, they are like anonymous. Those cars that are like allow for you to take the bodies out to the desert, allow for like these things to happen, allow for them to also go undetected, because it's not like there's one black Peregrino that's responsible for this. They show, but the fact that they keep showing up like that, the signs is super creepy. The other thing when you're talking about like the uncanny and the like real breaking through, that's another way that Bolaño reminds me of David Lynch, of like the Lynchian idea of like any of these scenes that like are so unnerving because you're seeing something that's breaking through. And it can seem completely normal. It's like looks like it's like for example in Twin Peaks and Fire Walks with Me, when the whatchamacallit, the fan starts spinning, the girl's going to get raped by her dad, and like that by making the connections, but every time you see it, it's so viscerally upsetting, for those reasons. Like this is breaking through, this violence, this darkness, this thing is breaking through. I wanted to the other thing so we finally have the two different groups that are activists that are bringing attention to this, although the first one that does bring attention to it only has like 3 members in Santa Teresa. They're all in the other city, the capital city, which is interesting. But then they also like, is it how did that shit on Lorita Almada?
Oh, on Lorita. No, I think that was the group from Mexico City.
Right.
Says, oh yeah, where was that? They were like, yeah, she's just like, using the here it is. Okay, page 512.
Yep,
Yeah,
just got
Women in Action. Okay, so this is the feminist group in Mexico City, Women in Action, WA. And she says, and at the end, yeah, they talk about how, they talk about the WSDP, the Sonora Feminists, comrades whose fight for justice was being waged in the most adverse circumstances. And they cast aspersions on the seer who had appeared with the WSDP on a regional TV show, just some old woman who apparently wanted to exploit the crimes for her own benefit. But again, like that is the spectacle aspect of this. The making, the consumption now of the crimes and of the news and of the stories.
Yeah.
This is random, but I just want to go back to this because I think it's interesting, and this was something that I thought of when I read this section, and the first time around too, many years ago. But so the thing with the black Peregrino car. So in Argentina during the Dirty War, the paramilitary, like death squads that disappeared people, drove dark green Ford Falcons.
Right.
And the Ford Falcon became like the symbol of the disappeared and of this, again, like machinery, a paramilitary sort of like, paragovernmental, like, machinery. And so for me, like the repetition of the color and the make of the car in relation to the crimes and the disappearances, like I can't help but think about the Ford Falcons and the green Ford Falcon. And I think that that's probably intentional as well. I think that it's, especially for the audience for whom this was originally written, like a Latin American or a Spanish speaking audience, like I think would be familiar with that. It's not an urban legend because it's true, but it has that sort of weight of like an urban nightmare, boogeyman type thing. And so for me, it's like the Black Peregrino, like, is the boogeyman. It's like,
what's taking that one step further, the fact that there are different types, it's not all Black Peregrinos. There's other types of cars that are mentioned. They're always black, but they're I forget the other one was, but like when the people who kill Harry Magana came in.
The Charger? No, the Ram. It's like a
that's what it is.
Or Ranger.
That makes it clear that it's not one. Like the way that you're talking about, like the Falcons were like a sort of singular entity, and this feels like it's like, again, breaking that a little bit.
Well, but I think the Black Peregrinos are a particular group of somebody or one person or somebody, and what they're doing, because if you look back, they're all in relation to the young girls. So when the young women died or disappeared, they say she was talking to, it looked like she knew the guys that she was that were in the driving the Black Peregrino. So those murders of like the young teens, that's where the Black Peregrino comes from. And that's what makes me, and those are the people that were kind of like hanging around the Rosas in the part about fate. That's the guy, Amalfitano says that there's a Black Peregrino on the street. And so then I think that there's something to do there more with like the narcos and with trafficking, and not necessarily the maquiladoras.
Yeah, I didn't mean like that they weren't connected that way, but that the other cars, that all of the murders aren't one. There's not one serial killer. There are different sets here. Andre brings up a good point of mentioning the connection between this and Gessel Dome, which is a book that we published at Open Letters some years ago. Actually, I have to renew the rights to that right now. Good reminder. But by Guillermo Sacamano, that is about a resort town north of Buenos Aires in the off season. It is very much a mosaic written book of all these different characters, all these different little stories. And they, again, there's one overarching story with these four main people who like kind of run the town and run this like resort town and benefit from it. But then all the rest of the book are like these little clipped passages in which people are like, someone cheats on their husband, so there's some other person murders that woman, and then that story just kind of goes away. Like nothing ever gets really resolved, and it just these little moments of violence over and over again in this town that's like the people who are living there are the workers who work there, make all their money during the tourist season, goes to the non-tourist season, and they end up just in this like just terrible situation of like murder and hate and violence and whatever else. And it's like, again, like what you said, the system sort of produced them. They came there to entertain the wealthy tourists, and then they're left in this space where they aren't doing great.
Chad, will you read the rest of Andre's comment? I didn't catch. It was something about.
Okay, so he says, I can't help myself comparing Sakamoto's book and this section, but when reading more in depth, it seems to confirm Bolaño as a writer who is making a fierce intent and combating the warped, false political narratives of our generation. I'm slowly learning that this is what we should always keep in mind whenever we read him.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that, because I think that, and I would just say, like, one of the books that for me really highlights that is Amuleto, or Amulet, because it's sort of like this elegy to like the sacrificed, the way that Auxilio Lacouture talks about this generation of like young socialist left wing generation in Latin America, is sort of like in this like this really sort of like elegiac tones, and that they're the sacrifice generation, and it's the beautiful young men and this and that. And that, like, I've always read Bolaño with a sense of like, that's where his sympathies lie, but he absolutely does not sort of toe the line on a leftist discourse. And in that way, I think that he tries to subvert as much as possible, not only that sort of like Latin American sort of leftist discourse, but also this discourse that we're reading here, on capitalism and on neoliberalism and on globalization. So I think that's huge, and thinking about whatever each discourse produces its other, right?
Yes. There is a comment that I'm not going to post or read the whole thing here. And I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your screen name, but Ayanana mid-dream sequence, mid-dream sequence. Sorry, I'm having a hard time reading it from here. Apologies. I'll apologize. But references a part on page 530 that we haven't gotten to yet that talks about the black peregrinos in particular.
Okay, good.
I always want to say Pellegrino. I always have to catch myself. I'm not talking about water.
No.
But it does come up again, specifically in relation to this, and will be part of next week's conversation. Okay, and cool. This person also mentioned a couple earlier things that that are very interesting, but do match up again with the next section next week, related to La Locura and other Bolaño figures, other connections between in the Bolaño universe of books. I mean, and Amulet's the one that has the reference to 2666 too.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think I read Amulet as sort of like a prequel to this, to 2666. Do you want to do a favorite line?
Yeah, we do. We should.
I have a couple. I need to try to find them.
Andre says thank you too. There's a subtle kinship between this section and the prophecies we find toward the ends of the book in the book Amulet. Thanks, Katie.
Thank you.
I had one that I marked early last night, and I can't remember what it was, but it was like, where is it?
Okay, wait. While you're looking, I want to and this is not my favorite line, but I think we need to say it out loud, which is on 481. This is when Haas is like arguing with the rancher in the cell, and when he's he's making the noise, and the rancher's like, shut up, like, nights are for sleeping, you gringo son of a bitch, he heard the rancher say. And then he hears him tossing and turning, and Haas hears him like puts the pillow over his head, cover his ears, and he's like, don't cover your head, he said aloud and in a booming voice. You're still going to die. And who's going to kill me, you gringo son of a bitch? You? Not me, motherfucker, said Haas. A giant is coming, and the giant is going to kill you. A giant? Asked the rancher. You heard me right, motherfucker, said Haas. A giant, a big man, very big, and he's going to kill you and everybody else.
Fucking intense. I have that
so
all.
Scary.
Like that's
so scary. Okay. I have a gross line, and I apologize for everyone.
I have a feeling I know what it is, but go.
No, go ahead. No.
Nope, you go. I want to hear you say it.
I can't. There's a couple of gross lines in this section. You're
Yeah,
not gonna guess. You're not gonna guess that I would pick this section. That I would pick this. Okay, hold on. So this is when the cops are like sitting around and talking. It's one of the scenes where the cops are just being horrible, and then they're in the group of them are they're interrogating Haas. Okay. So they ask about like the blood that's down on his floor. I mean, like they found something in the basement that has blood on it. They asked him about it. Asked about the blood, Haas said it was probably from one of the women with whom he'd had relations during her menstrual period. When Haas relayed this information, Inspector Ortiz Robledo asked what kind of man he thought he was. An ordinary man, said Haas. An ordinary man doesn't fuck a woman when she's bleeding, said Ortiz Rebolledo. I do, was Haas's answer. Only swine behave like that, said the inspector. In Europe, we're all swine, answered Haas.
Yep, that's the section I thought you were going to read.
You did? I think that's so hysterical. In Europe.
It really is.
Je ne sais quoi.
Yep.
It's so funny. Okay.
I saw that. I was going to read that same line. I was like, and then once you said that, you're like, oh, it's you.
What kind of man do you think you are? An ordinary man.
This is the one that I marked because it just gave me like the most like not uneasy. Wait, let me make sure I'm not missing something. I think there was a different line that I had in mind last night, but I can't find it now. But on 463, we get the story from Epifanio about the murder of Isabel Uraya, who was shot to death. No one ever figured out why. And he goes through and explains, and the reason it stood out to me is that he goes through and explains like, they really didn't do anything about this case. Like they didn't really try and figure anything out, to the point that he picks up and takes her appointment book and puts it with the other evidence, but it's never looked at. So he takes it and he's like, why are there numbers in there of 3 narcos? One of them was Rengifo. I also found the numbers of several judiciales, including a big boss in Hermosillo. What are these phone numbers doing? Blah, blah, blah. And the line that I want to reference as my quote unquote favorite is the last one. So I kept a notebook, bucket, and didn't do anything.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have
stuff and bad cops and.
Okay, I have one last closing line. This is what I was looking for the one. This is when they find the body in the illegal dump, El Chile.
Shit.
They find the young girl. Oh, she's like 17, and this is again with the breast and the nipple. And so like they decide like something has to be done about this dump, right? And the mayor of Santa Teresa ordered that the dump be closed, although he later changed the order, informed by his secretary of the legal impossibility of closing something that, for all intents and purposes, had never been opened.
I couldn't stop laughing at that.
I know.
And then there's another reference where they're like trying to move this dump.
Yeah. But it's the futility of this. Like, yeah. So here they go. For a week, a police guard was posted on the edge of El Chile, and for 3 days, a few garbage trucks, aided by the 2 city dump trucks, ferried trash to the dump in Colonia Aquino. But faced with the magnitude of the job and their own lack of manpower, they soon gave up. And it's kind of like that's the whole thing.
Yeah.
There's like the overwhelm.
The overwhelm of the remainder of the trash.
And the dump, the residue, and the remnants.
On that note.
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be back next week with the next section of...
Yeah, what do we have?
I always have to look.
Okay.
I linked to it in the show notes, but I always have to look and figure out what the page numbers are. I'll do that right now, because the other thing I was going to mention is that you recently joined Twitter. So everyone who is following us here, listening to the podcast, watching the podcast, and is into literary Twitter, literary things, should be following you. And you are at MK Whittemore.
MK Whittemore.
So follow Katie.
I'm not really good at Twitter, and I had to I activated it and had to almost get off the same day, but I'm trying. I'm going to really try.
I don't think being good at Twitter is something that people should be putting on a fucking resume. So like, I think you're fine.
No.
So we go through page 575 for next week.
Okay. Great.
And then the week after will be the end of part 4, and then we get into the part of our Arcamboldi. So we are
I can't wait to get into
like
that
a train moving along towards the end of this. So rate us, tune in, follow us, send any questions you want to our various Twitters. I don't tweet very often. I just have to retweet things, but I do check it. So if you tag me or DM me, I'll write back to you. But if anyone has any questions or things that you think we should address on here, please feel free.
Yeah,
Email,
please.
do whatever you want to do to get in touch. That'd be great. And we'll be back next week with some more crimes.
Thanks, everybody.